All right. Well, it is noon, so let's hop in. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Dan Maloof, Senior Director of Product here at IANS. I'm excited to be hosting this week's tech briefing. As a quick refresher for any new folks on the line, the purpose of these 30-minute briefings is for our rotating cast of IANS faculty members to dive into the relevant InfoSec news topics of the week and provide you with some specific actionable guidance to take back to your teams. With that as a backdrop, I'm thrilled to be joined today by two of our IANS faculty rock stars, Jessica Heavenstreet and Jake Williams. Jessica currently serves as the Senior Director of Corporate Security for Quorum Software, which provides software for the oil and gas industry. And Jake is VP of R&D at Hunter Strategy and a former startup founder with decades of experience in technology and security. Jessica and Jake, thanks so much for stopping by today.
Always a
Yeah, no
pleasure.
worries.
All right, let's take a look at the agenda for today. First topic we're going to discuss is this is actually a Wired story, but it's getting a little bit of heat. Talking about the EU potentially souring on U.S. cloud providers and what the potential implications of that might be for folks here in this room, and then also more broadly too. After that, we're going to talk a little bit more about some CISA staff cuts that we've been seeing and some just continued sort of change in the federal government around cybersecurity, what that means, any kind of updates around that, and kind of takeaways and guidance that we can continue to provide around that story as it continues to evolve. And then finally, sort of an interesting one from a few weeks ago, actually. Well, the postmortem was from a few weeks ago, but talking a little bit about a software supply chain hack that wasn't. It was discovered by bug bounty researchers, and a lot of lessons we can sort of take away from that one. So we'll dive into that one as well. But yeah, with that, Jessica, cool if I start with you talking about U.S.
Yeah.
cloud providers and sort of the EU potentially souring on them and what the implications would be in your end.
Yeah. So, Wired had an article that was talking about how EU-based companies are trying to look at how to de-risk the continued use of the US-based cloud providers. I mean, as I think all of you are aware, the big three are based in the US, but given some of the I don't know, shenanigans that we're seeing with the current U.S. administration. It's making folks concerned about privacy and access to data and those kinds of things. The EU hasn't always been particularly thrilled with the U.S. in this area anyway. If you look at things like the Schrems 2 ruling and that kind of thing, and I think the chaos that is happening right now and the I'm trying not to be politically charged, and we'll just go with chaos with the Trump administration. We're getting pressure. The EU companies are getting pressure there, and so there are a couple cloud providers in the EU. They have said that they're seeing more interest. They're some of the things to keep in mind here is if you have significant business in the EU, can you migrate off of cloud providers? Should you be doing data residency in the EU to kind of, de-risk that? If you do that, though, and you have posture management and other security tooling and platforms deployed, are you still going to be able to use those? Will those integrations still work? Because most platforms go where the market share is, right? They're not going to waste their time on smaller providers necessarily. They're going to do Microsoft, Google, AWS, for example. And then, also where there's a void, it's going to be filled. And in this case, it's going to be filled by China. And there are just all sorts of risks that come along with that. And so I would do a thoughtful and thorough analysis if that is a direction that you're being pressured to go. Jake, what are you thinking?
Okay, well, first off, I want to replace shenanigans with creative interpretation of legal authorities, right?
Oh, good
And
one. I
that
like
being
it.
yeah, I mean, look, I come out of intelligence. That's our bread and butter is creative interpretation of legal authorities. Anyway, so alas, totally understand where the concern is at, from folks. Amazon in particular, right? And again, I don't want to be clear, like I'm not trying to be overtly political. I'm walking through risk calculus that's been explained to me by customers in the EU, who look at Bezos, who runs the Washington Post, who very clearly directed them not to endorse a chosen candidate, he very clearly is putting his finger, on the political scales, and also happens to incidentally own AWS. And so I understand where some of the concerns are. At all that said, this is not a time, in my mind at least, right, to get off of one of the big three. It is understandable why people are concerned. I totally get it. For me, I don't think this is probably a direct risk for most IANS clients. I think you already have data residency, addressed by those cloud providers' deployments in the EU. What I worry about are your business partners that are wholly owned by or operate primarily out of the EU as EU entities, because they have different sets of concerns and are likely looking to de-risk. No joke, Alibaba Cloud has been operating in Germany for almost a decade now, and other portions of the EU. And so, they are not like, if you look at the top players, right, they come in, pretty high up there, internationally. Look, I think it's delusional, right, to say, oh, we're moving off of, Amazon or Google or Microsoft because of data security concerns and go to Alibaba, but people don't always act rationally, right?
Right.
And so this is something you need to, again, for your EU business partners, you really need to be thinking about from a third-party risk management perspective. And I want to come back to something Jessica said that I think is probably the biggest takeaway here. And that is that as folks move off of the big three, I mean, look, they're going to lose security controls, primarily CSPM and CNAP. We already deal with, I on a regular basis, deal with clients that, well, less regular in the last few weeks here, but that are, for whatever reason, deploying an OCI, right, Oracle Cloud. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, right? No horse jokes intended, right? But alas, check LinkedIn for more context. But alas, look, seriously, as folks that you're working with move off of these big three cloud providers, they are losing capabilities in CSPM for posture management, as well as for CNAP for real-time monitoring. I see a question in the chat. What about like Japanese cloud providers like NTT? Look, folks, cloud providers are a dime a dozen, right? Come down to it. There's Exascale, Elastics, right, in the EU that already explicitly said, like, hey, we are seeing more interest, right, in folks migrating off of the US-based clouds. It's not a matter of where specifically you're going. I mean, other than Alibaba, which is like an obvious don't, right? As you move down market, though, you are losing some of those capabilities. And I see the question in the chat. What do I mean by CSPM and CNAP? CSPM is Cloud Security Posture Management. So this is the kind of stuff that makes sure you don't have like obvious misconfigurations, like exposing S3 buckets to the internet, right?
No one would ever do that. I don't know what you're talking about.
Of course not, right? Of course not. And CNAP is basically the real-time workload protection, right? So Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. And so, what you're losing here, again, are those posture management real-time monitoring. And again, I don't think IANS clients, by and large, are the ones that are moving off here. It's your vendors and your business partners, and this creates new risk for you. And so this is probably one of those touch points where if you have folks that are wholly in the EU, you're reaching out to them about this. Right? So,
Jessica, other thoughts? I see. Do you want to talk to any of the questions in the chat or any additional points?
No, I was just saying that, Jake answered them. Yeah, so, it's our job as security professionals to raise the risks, right? And so if you're hearing this from your leaders, it's your job to explain then, like, that's a business decision, we can do it. But then you need to keep in mind these other impacts to the business, these other impacts to our ability to provide security for the organization, right? It's not just we're going to switch to, whatever other cloud providers that's not one of the big three.
Yeah, I've got a question here that asks specifically, how serious is the concern that U.S. government may ask U.S. CSPs, cloud service providers, to restrict foreign business applications? I don't trust Alibaba, but should Mideastern, South Asian country have similar concerns about Azure or AWS? This is a deep topic. I would assert with high confidence, right, that any major tech company in any large industrialized country like the US or China or Japan, or pick a country, right, in the EU as well, has ties to their government, right, and does things for their government, right? So there's always a risk there. The typically those follow some rule of law. I understand why, given the current climate, an interpretation of flexible interpretations of legal authorities, why people have increased concerns relative to the status quo, which again I think is everywhere. I don't have a good answer for this question other than, like, I think it's something that should have always been in your threat model, right? To William's point, this is something that should always be in your threat model, but it is something that, even if you're stepping back and being like, this doesn't apply to me, yes, it does. If you have, supply chain relationships in the EU, particularly cybersecurity supply chain concerns. So
Cool. All right, shall we keep moving?
let's do it.
All right, let's talk a little bit about CISA. Jessica, do you want to kind of give the latest on what's going on over there at CISA? There's a lot of reporting coming out, a lot of potential cuts happening to threat hunting teams. We saw red teams being cut earlier. Obviously, also the news that the NSA director was fired. So there's a lot of sort of turmoil, uncertainty, chaos sort of happening in the government around cyber. I want to get to kind of what should orgs be doing? What are other things that folks should be doing without potentially as much help as they're used to? Jessica, I'll give you first crack. Jake, unless you want first crack, but go for it.
Yeah, so um, I'm gonna try and steer way wide of any, political commentary here.
Totally.
I apologize if any comes out inadvertently. So there's a lot of chaos happening, as I kind of said before. We're seeing cuts across the government in every aspect. If we focus specifically on CISA and other, cyber-related agencies, I remember when CISA was kind of first launched, and I remember thinking at the time, I hope organizations don't become too reliant on this, because as is the case with the government, right? Any incoming administration can completely change things, right? And then, CISA became awesome, right? They have the CAV, they're doing this great research. They have, they're supportive. Like, I mean, I was just like, this is awesome. And now we're seeing that, there's these mass cuts coming. And so what is that going to mean to our program? So for example, let's talk about Avanti, right? We now have 13 entries in the KEVs since January 1st of last year. They've done amazing analysis and details on, what to look for, how to respond, all of this kind of stuff. They're doing this amazing work, and we're going to see less and less of this. On top of that, I think that our intelligence partners, and Jake is going to be able to speak much more clearly about this, are going to have less and less confidence in sharing with the US, right? And therefore, we are going to be handicapped in our knowledge and ability to respond and protect organizations throughout the United States. And ultimately, we are less safe because of it from a cyber perspective in our organizations. I think we're going to continue to see more cuts, and that they aren't particularly well thought out or risk analyzed for the impact. And I'm concerned.
You were doing some gymnastics there to avoid saying some things. That's fantastic. If I can jump in here for a second, just a couple of things, right? Yes, the cybercom concerns me. Firing the director of the NSA / head of cybercom, it's a dual hat position. Concerns me. I had a piece in Axios yesterday about the potential that gets separated. I think that's going to be devastating for our country. I think it's going to cause intelligence failures. It's not going to impact most enterprises day one, day two, whatever. The lack of threat intelligence sharing by CISA will. A lot of what you get out of your ISACs, whether they want to admit it or not, comes in private back channel briefings from CISA. I remember a couple of weeks ago standing up here, I believe it was during the Oracle breach, where I said, "Oh my gosh, somebody says, what about InfraGard?" And I hand to heaven was not joking when I said, I'm not sure InfraGard still exists, right? And somebody in the chat's like, no, InfraGard definitely exists. My wife, who works in critical infrastructure, and she then independently did not watch that brief, any of that. We didn't discuss this last week. Is like, I can't believe the garbage I'm getting from InfraGard now. It's just complete garbage. And so, this is somebody who ran a threat intelligence practice, right, with say 15 people at a big biomed company, and pharmaceuticals and whatnot. Today, runs threat hunting in a different critical infrastructure sector. So they rely on private briefings, right? And your ISACs rely on private briefings from CISA and back channel government information. That's, I mean, that stuff is missing. I want to bring up the bigger thing that I think is likely to impact, because that's already in progress, right? But something that's foundationally changing. Dan already mentioned the red team contracts being cut, and this round of cuts with CISA, which is expected to be 1,300 people, more than a third of the remaining staff, is going to primarily one of the big cuts is in their threat hunting contracts. I cannot think of a worse time to do this than on the eve of learning that OCC, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, was compromised. We're doing a separate briefing on that tomorrow as we have more data about that. We're still digging into back channel information for details there too. But Microsoft is the one who discovered that almost 2 years in, and that's with CISA's threat hunting support, right? Once we remove that, and OCC, while they're not the largest of government agencies, is still pretty big, right? I mean, even by ION's client standards, it's a few thousand people. I think OCC is 3,500 people or something. And so we're not talking about some organization, government agency with a couple hundred employees that literally is exclusively relying on services from CISA. What does this mean to you, right? Because I mean, think about what it means to me as a taxpayer, but that's a separate discussion. What this means to you is, traditionally, I used to look at connecting to government networks as fairly safe. I know there's all kinds of jokes to be made about government cybersecurity, FedGov cybersecurity, but man, they have ginormous targets on their back, bigger than the vast majority of you in this room, right? Not all of you, but the vast majority. And so, and there's because of public records laws, right? There's an availability bias, right? When the government gets breached, you always learn about it. And so, I say always, I guess almost always learn about it. But I can no longer count on that security today, right? I used to look at, when I was doing third-party risk assessment, particularly for, connecting into their networks, I would look and say, well, it's FedGov, so meh, right? I'm way more worried about other folks. And now I got to tell you, that's completely 180, right? Because now I'm way more worried about FedGov, because simultaneously they have, again, that ginormous target on their back. They've now lost, especially your smaller agencies, have lost the ability to do security testing and threat hunting. This is cataclysmic, right? Not to mention the folks that have internal threat hunt capabilities rely on not just private, but classified briefings from CISA to enable those hunts. That's going away too, right? So I now have to look at FedGov networks as with a completely different level of risk than I did a month ago. So anyway,
anything to add, Jessica? Anything from the chat or anything like that?
No. I really want to get to the next one because it is just so juicy.
That's fair. I know we've talked about this a lot, but Jake, in the past, you've said kind of, honing in on your in-house capabilities is kind of the go-to that we've been saying, right? The more that's possible, go for that.
Yeah, I mean, build trust groups. I keep saying this, right? Yeah. And it's build trust relationships. I mean, we are on the eve of going out to RSA, where we are going to have lots of analyst exchanges, right? I have my dance card is filling up rapidly, and a lot of them are not business exchanges; they are analyst exchanges. Look, I get the travel budgets are tight, and you're probably not going to be able to send folks out. Both me and Jessica are on staff at DEF CON, and so I believe you work B-Sides Las Vegas usually too.
Yeah, B-Sides Las Vegas. I'm doing Wild West Hackenfest. So
right, yeah. and this stuff takes a lot of time, right? I know you go out of pocket for it a lot. I do as well. I'm not saying tell your employees to go out of pocket. I'm saying find the budget to get them out, because to these conferences, because that's where you make these relationships where you can pick up the phone and call back channel and say, is this happening to you as well, or is it just me? And the wider field of view gets, the more valuable that information is.
Yeah. Oh, and fun fact, if you volunteer for a lot of these conferences, you get to go to free, sometimes go for free. Sometimes they'll cover like some of your hotel, not all of it. There are ways to make this cheaper. So
get
creative. Yeah.
You can volunteer to give back, or you can volunteer to like get bennies, right? Yeah. I don't actually care, right?
I do both. I get something out of it, but also it reduces my out-of-pocket personal costs.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool. All right, let's keep on moving then. Jake, this was one you wanted to include. I'm just going to let you go. Tell us about what is this story? Why did you want to talk about this today?
Yeah, so I stumbled across this story that was a postmortem from a bug bounty that was published in February, and I don't know how I missed it through the entirety of March, right? But it came across my desk last week, and my jaw hit the floor reading it because it tracks really, really closely with an incident that I worked. So I have a bit of a personal connection to this too, very, very closely. It involves a CI/CD pipeline, all right? So continuous integration, continuous deployment. These are automated build pipelines your DevOps teams use. And there are multiple levels of fail here. The long and the short of it is that here, this is bug bounty researchers that found this for a major SaaS provider that they obviously do not name. And the SaaS provider is not coming forward either. But
I find this shocking.
I know. What are the odds, right? The SaaS provider's maximum payout schedule, right? For critical vulnerability is 10K. To give you an idea of how impactful this particular vuln was, they gave the researcher 50K. And so, so your maximum published is 10. They're like, you know what? This totally would have burned us to the ground. Here you go. Take our money, right? And so that gives you an idea of the impact of the vuln. In fact, to be honest, there were multiple different $10,000 vulns in here, right? That they ultimately chained together to get this. So it's not that far off the mark. But the reason I want to bring this one up specifically is that it involves Docker Hub. Docker Hub and GitHub Actions, right? So I would say in probably a full third of security assessments I've done over the last year, we found vulnerabilities where we've looked at the CI/CD pipeline. We've identified vulns in the CI/CD pipeline. Whether that is, writable token access to a .github folder, so that I can change how actions get run, you name it, right? We oftentimes find .git folders left behind in build systems, as they did here. That led to the compromise of a private NPM repo that, ultimately the threat actors, here in this case, bug bounty, threat actors, right? Identified how they could use that token to go commit code back to a private NPM repo. And all of this without ever touching the logs in your CI/CD pipeline, to the extent that the 0.1% of you are monitoring them anyway. My big takeaways here, right, are they're multiple, right? First off, like I can't cover this in depth in a few minutes here, right? So homework assignment for you is go read the post.
It is fascinating. When Jake sent it to me, separate from us planning this, he was like, go read this. And I was like, oh my God. Like, it is like a thriller to read it.
Yeah. If you're into this kind of thing, right? It's definitely a thriller, right? So we're wired a little differently, obviously, but no, go read it. And I want to caveat up front, right? I know Jessica works with her DevOps team in and out, very heavily, technically inclined. Some of you on the call are not, and I get that, right? So some of you are going to read this and you're like, woof, I recognize a few of those words, right? And that's fine, by all means. But your next piece of the homework assignment is you turn around to your DevOps team, right? And you say, I want a written report, right, on how we are ensuring that we are not creating these failures. Make them educate you. Then also turn to your AppSec team. And you want a written report from them, right, identifying how they're validating that you're not tripping over yourselves with these findings as well, right?
So the other thing I want to point out here, Jake, is that they targeted recent acquisitions.
Oh yeah.
Right. And
Yes.
so if your company is involved in M&A or has been in the recent past, right? Go, and you have not fully integrated, or you believe you have, uh, right? Um, go take a look at those things, right? Because yeah, those are areas you're probably not monitoring. Those are areas that, are kind of a foregone whatever, and you're focused on the big organization, right, for your program. These are areas where these edge cases are where they're going to try and go after.
Yeah, it's fantastic because I actually brought this in to talk about the supply chain angle and then completely forgot about it in the write up because I was so in the tech, right? But
Yeah.
Jessica's right. They specifically found this because they're like, oh, I bet this company they acquired didn't have good AppSec or as good AppSec, knowledge, right, and controls in place. Yeah, the M&A focus is obviously huge there too. Although, if you cover my whole go to your DevOps team, get a written report, go to your AppSec
Yes.
team, get a written report, you're covered anyway, right? There's no asterisk there that's like, but ignore the acquisitions, right?
But you might have to explicitly say, don't ignore
that's fair.
the
You know what?
acquisitions.
That's absolutely
Right?
fair because how often do we do tabletops or just
Right.
incident responses, right? Where folks are like, oh yeah, that's 100% covered, and you're like 100% of what, right? And they're like, oh, the acquire
except
code,
for,
right?
except for, except
Yeah.
for, except
Right,
for.
right. Yes. Right?
But 100%.
100% asterisk,
Yeah.
asterisk. Right? So,
Yeah.
you're right. You should explicitly call that out. You're 100% correct.
What about last couple minutes or so? What about the bug bounty piece? Anything you want to say around that? Because it's a topic that we don't cover a ton, but I think folks probably have differing opinions around bug bounties. So, what are your thoughts on that in general?
You want to start here, Jessica? I have thoughts, but I don't want to poison the well.
I have thoughts that it's a sticky wicket, and
Okay.
not and I come from the perspective of working for a smallish company with a very small, lean team, right? My team couldn't take on a bug bounty, right? With our resourcing. Even though I think it is a good way to become proactively aware of these problems and address them in your software, your applications, your products, whatever. But I don't think it's for everyone.
Yeah, that's fair, right? I always tell folks don't set up a bug bounty unless you're ready to actually remediate vulns, because you will have folks drop vuln. For those that aren't aware, right, I don't think I've run into a bug bounty program that pays before they remediate the vulnerability, right? So it's not when you notify, it's when they remediate. Look, if you're going to do it, use Bug Crowd. I don't know what else to say. I mean, Bug Crowd, there are competitors, but Bug Crowd. And anyway, it's one man's opinion. But look, at the end of the day, you want a third-party arbiter to help triage the bugs. The separate piece is you want to make sure that you pay fairly for them, right? Mm-hmm. This bug, $50,000 is a rounding error, right? Compared to the cost of working the data breach or even just investigating an incident. And so that's another big point is think about what the market value for one of these vulnerabilities is, because if somebody brings one of these to you and you're like, oh, but our payout schedule stops at 10,000 because that's what we arbitrarily decided, they probably are not bringing the next one of those to you, right? But always evaluate, right? When you get one of these submissions, particularly the extremely high severity submissions, that the people who brought it to you had a choice, right? They had a choice to sell it to less scrupulous folks, right?
Yeah.
And they chose to come to you. And the way you get them to keep coming back is paying fairly.
This also reminds me of don't make the reporting requirements ridiculous. I read an article last week or the week before about a bug bounty researcher that submitted something to major technology vendor and did write-ups, screenshots, all of this kind of stuff, and they required a video. And so the researcher maliciously complied and sent like this massively long video of the bug took like, I don't know, less than a minute to like do everything, and then he just let it go for a very long time to be like, really? I'm showing you exactly what I already submitted. So, if you're going to do bug bounty, don't do that also.
Right on. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. As always, appreciate the time today. That was a lot of different topics covered today. So good stuff. And yeah, we'll definitely do this again soon. So take care,
Awesome.
guys, and thanks again.
Appreciate it.
Okay,
Thanks so much.
thanks.
All right. See
Bye.
ya.